Hello everyone, or at least anyone who may be watching. As was in the title of this video, this will be just looking back through my Sonic the Hedgehog art journey. I've been wanting to do this video for a while for a few reasons. One is that I find it interesting. Maybe there are people out there who will also find it interesting, but I also think maybe it could be helpful or insightful for anyone, maybe for anyone who may be discouraged with how their art is going. Maybe this will help people not feel so discouraged. I'm not really sure. So this sketchbook, I've had it for quite a while, but the majority of it is Sonic the Hedgehog. And so this is actually the last page of this particular sketchbook, dated at the end of last year, 2024. And so I'm gonna give just a little bit of background for my Sonic art journey before I get started, but if anyone is not interested in that, I'll put a timestamp on screen. But the background is that I'm relatively new to the Sonic fandom franchise. I was always aware of Sonic through Sonic the Hedgehog 1, the video game. I played it growing up, different ports of it. The one I'm most familiar with is the mobile port that you could play on the Apple Store. I remember back in the day you could actually play the game on the iPod Nano and the iPod Classic, which is kind of funny. But I played it mostly when the iPod Touch came out. That's where I played it the most. So I've always been familiar with Sonic, but mostly through that game. I didn't know there were more games beyond that. I didn't know that Tails and Knuckles were not actually originally introduced in that game, so that tells you how much I knew about the Sonic franchise. But just a couple of years ago, I was given access to Paramount Plus through my brother, and so one day I was looking on there and I saw that the Sonic movie was on there. I hadn't seen it when it had come out, so I was bored, and I decided, what the heck, I'll give it a try. So I watched the movie, and I had zero expectations for it. So after I saw the movie, I was surprised as to how much I actually liked it. The second movie was also on there, so I watched it as well, and those movies are what got me very interested in the franchise. I was curious about how much was the same between the movies and the video games, and how much was different, and so I went on a deep dive. I went into all Sonic media, trying to learn everything I could about the franchise. And so one of the things that I did was to watch the Sonic X anime, and it was while I was watching that anime that I thought, I just really wanted to try drawing Sonic. He looked like a fun character to draw. I mean, he has a really fun and I think very well done character design. And I've always been a fan of drawing. I just haven't necessarily always had a lot of reason to draw, I guess. I would draw off and on. So while I enjoyed drawing, I wouldn't say I was necessarily very good at it. But so I felt very motivated to start drawing Sonic the Hedgehog, the character. And so, silly me, I decided to try drawing without a reference, even though I was not very familiar with the character design at the time, because like I said, I wasn't super into the franchise. I wasn't super familiar with all the characters and whatnot. But I decided to draw him from memory. And so that leads me to my very, very first drawing of Sonic, and it's, looking back, it's not great. But again, hopefully this is maybe motivational for some people who maybe don't think that they're drawing very well. This is a more recent example of my more current drawing capabilities, and this is where it started. So this was my very first attempt. You can see it's dated April 2nd, 2023. That was my first attempt. No reference. It looks pretty bad. But at the time that I drew this, I thought, okay, it wasn't as bad as I had thought it would be. And so I was actually quite convinced from here on that I could learn to draw this character. And so after I drew this, I looked at some images, some references to see what I did wrong, which was everything. And I took what I saw, I tried to implement it into another drawing, again without reference. So I looked at references and then I went back without a reference to try drawing again. To this day, though, I'm still not really sure if this is better or worse than the first one. Yeah. But I was still pretty convinced that I would be able to learn to draw this character in time. And so the next time I drew Sonic, I decided to look up a tutorial, and the tutorial I found was actually one posted, I want to say it's on the Paramount YouTube channel. It's a tutorial by Tyson Hess himself, but he's drawing movie Sonic specifically. And so I followed that tutorial, and this was the result of drawing that, or following that tutorial. And then I decided to try drawing him a couple more times without the tutorial, but still with this as reference, just to see how much I had retained from the tutorial itself, to see how well I could continue drawing without having to follow a tutorial, specifically. This one doesn't look as great because it starts getting into the, I don't know if anyone's had to write a single word or phrase like a bunch of times consecutively, but if you do that, you'll find that your handwriting starts to suffer after you've done it a few times. This is kind of like the same phenomenon, I guess. It's like I've done the same thing so much that now it's not looking great. And so from there, I decided, okay, I need to not be doing the exact same thing every single time. And so I started branching off into other things, other poses. So this was my next attempt at drawing Sonic. I was using a reference on this one. I decided to use a reference, one, because you should always be using a reference when you're learning to draw something new. That's, something I didn't do in my very first drawing, which I should have done. So I'll have the reference on screen if I remember to find it. So I used a reference on this. This one's also using a reference, though it's a 3D model, which I don't know if it's the best thing to be using as a reference when you're first starting to draw a character in 2D in pencil. But from there, I again decided to see how much I had learned or picked up from this experience using a reference to draw this. And I tried to draw kind of the same posing without a reference, again, just to see how much I retained. So while I do think it's important to be using a reference when you're learning to draw something, I think it's also important to see, check how you're doing. Take some time to try drawing without a reference, just to kind of get a gauge of where you're at. So that's what that was. I would say this is definitely better than my first drawing. So there's some progress being made. I also decided to draw Shadow for the first time. You'll also notice in a lot of my early drawings, I don't draw their whole bodies, because I was very intimidated by drawing hands and feet, which, if anyone watching here does art, will probably understand that. Hands are notorious for being difficult to draw. But anyway, so this one is using both of these are using 3D model references. Again, no hands, no feet. This one I didn't use a reference, but I had this to look off of, and so I'm slowly but surely learning a thing or two about Sonic's character construction, how to draw him, getting more comfortable drawing him, And so these two, no references on either of these. And then here I was a little brave. I kind of made the ghost of hands for Shadow, but that's about it. This is the first full-body Sonic since my first attempt, I think. You can see it's not great. I struggled for a long time to get the shape of his shoes right. I don't know what it is, but the shoes are so hard for me to draw. I'd almost say that they're harder for me to draw than the hands, which doesn't make sense. But yeah. And then I thought at this point that I had basically gotten him down, so then I started doing some practices, drawing different facial expressions. I guess I was still intimidated by the body, so I decided to focus more on the face. So I practiced some different facial expressions, and then I think it was at this point... This is another full body. Hands and feet still look wonky, but I think it was at this point that I started noticing that his spikes, his quills, are just kind of they look like a sideways mountain range, or I don't know. It looks really weird, like the back fin of Magikarp just put on its side or something. It looks really dumb. And so I decided I needed to take a step back again, take a look at some images, some references to see how his spikes are shaped, how they're drawn. And so then I used another reference, finally, again. So I used the reference, his quills are a lot better. You'll notice this one is a much better drawing than the last one I did following a reference. So I'm definitely improving. You'll also notice, though, that I didn't finish this one. Again, hands are intimidating, so at the time, I was so happy with how this had turned out that I just didn't want to ruin it with drawing his ginormous hand. So instead, I practiced drawing hands just off the rest of the page. So at this point, from here to here, I decided, what was wrong was his spikes. I was making them too short and too straight. And so from there, I kind of overcorrected. Now the spikes are going way too long and sometimes a bit way too curvy and just kind of awkward. Here I drew him face on for the first time. But this kind of stuck around for a bit. His spikes are just very awkward, very long, but I don't know how to describe it. They just look awkward. I'm still struggling with the shoes. His body proportions are a bit wonky in this one, but at the time I drew this, I thought it was great. I mean, you look at the other ones I had done without reference. This was a masterpiece in comparison. So, yeah, I just kept practicing. Here's another one that looks mildly better. And then I drew Tails for the first time. He doesn't look great, but he doesn't look as bad as my first ever Sonic drawing. So, take that however you will. I actually don't use a reference to draw Tails for a long time for some reason. I thought I just had him down or something. I don't know. But anyway, those are the first drawings of Tails. I go back to Sonic. His spikes are starting to look a little better. Still kind of struggling with the arms and legs as usual. There's another one face on. Another one with just a different expression to play with. Some more. I thought these were really good at the time, but it's around this point that I started getting into this weird habit of drawing his muzzle kind of flat. It's like it makes his eye shape look a bit odd, kind of, I don't know, blocky. So his muzzle looks kind of like a sausage or something, I don't know. And it took me a while to figure that out and notice it and break free from it. This one is also just very stiff. The posing looks a bit unnatural and, again, just stiff. And then I just filled the rest of the page practicing drawing his hand, or hands, whatever. And then this one, I remember being so incredibly proud of this one. I thought it was amazing. Looking back on it now, of course, I see everything that's wrong with it. I see all the wonkiness. The eye shape is a bit off. His ears. I started making the ears way too long at this point as well, and that went on for a little bit as well. His shoes are still not quite there. They still look a bit pancake-like, and it's kind of awkward. The proportions are all a bit off. But again, at the time, I thought this was fantastic. And then I also built up the courage to try drawing him from the back. And I did a few practices drawing him from the back until I felt like I got it. And then this is the last time I drew him from the back, and I never did it again. Not on paper, anyway. And then this one, I finally started figuring things out with his face. It's just his head isn't really positioned correctly. If I remember, I'll put on screen. I did draw this digitally. A lot of times if I like a drawing, I'll do it digitally so that I can actually finish it, like inking the line work and coloring it in. So I'll do that digitally on some. This one in particular, when I did that, I fixed his head positioning. So yeah, this is when Sonic really started to take shape, I guess is the way to say it. His muzzle shape is looking better. The eye shape is looking better. The shoes are becoming less pancake-like. And then here, I finally drew Shadow in his entirety. I have a drawing of his shoe down here. I knew his shoes were going to be tricky for me. I mean, I struggle with Sonic's shoes, and they're probably the easiest shoes you could ever draw. So Shadow's shoes, I knew were going to be a nightmare. I don't remember, though, if I drew this before or after I drew this. You would think before, so that I'd have practice, but this looks better than these, so I don't remember. I just remember I drew this and I was like, oh, finally did it. I got through it. I've gotten a lot better at drawing his shoes and just all of him in general. All of him. Get it? Okay. Anyway, so yeah, that's my first Shadow drawing. He also improves drastically. But anyway, moving on, just some more Sonic drawings. His face is like kind of getting flat and like wide, weirdly. That kind of went on for a bit. But overall, I'd say he's still, like, in general improving. It was also here, though, that for some reason I, like, blanked and forgot where exactly his buckle is. So on a few of these, the buckle is lower than it should be. But anyway, this one is the one that was kind of like my breakthrough for Sonic, specifically his shoes. It was like finally when I drew this one in particular with his shoes, drawing them from the side, that I actually figured out the shape that I wanted to be doing for his shoes. And from here on out, I struggle with his shoes a lot less. Just another practice. Oftentimes, I don't fully finish, like I don't put the eyes and mouth in, so, you know, just beware of that. And then here, I finally drew tails again. No reference. This one looks terrible, so don't look at it. This one is inked in because at some point I wanted to do an inking and colored pencil drawing, but doing line work terrifies me, so I decided to do a practice to figure out which line weight I wanted to use and just how to do it exactly. So that's why I went back and I inked this later. Moving on, just some more practice. Different expression, different posing, more dynamic posing. This one's very stiff, but I was trying to do a more like relaxed position with the arms and hands, but it didn't work out. But that's why you practice, so that you can learn these things. You can't learn unless you try. And here he's just chilling out in a chair, so, you know. And then here, this one he's taking off. I thought that was a fun pose. And then I finally did my first colored pencil one. Up here is just, you know, practice getting the colors right and the blending of the colors and etc. And so, yeah, this is the first time I did him. I inked the line work and then I colored it in with colored pencil. You'll see moving forward that my colored pencil does get better. It becomes more saturated and the shading and highlighting pops out more as well as we go on. So this is the next one I did with colored pencil. Sonic himself, like the drawing itself, it looks okay. There are a few things that are still a little wonky in my opinion, but it's generally getting better. I finally also decided to do one looking at him from the back, which was a nightmare because of his shoes, and I struggle so much with shoes. I don't know if I've made that clear, but the shoes are a struggle for me. So doing them from the back, I don't know what was wrong with me that made me decide to do that. But so this is another one that I was really happy with at the time. So I did it digitally. If I remember, I'll put the digital one on here as well. Moving on, so here I have the three hedgehogs, the three male hedgehogs, Sonic, Shadow, and Silver. I don't know why I wasn't using a reference for Silver, because you'd think I'd have learned by now that if I'm drawing a new character, I should use a reference, especially if I don't know them very well. So, yeah. That's Silver without a reference. And then I think I looked at a reference and then came back and drew without a reference again, this Silver. So that's why it doesn't really look that much better, if at all. But anyway, so that's that page. Here's just some more practicing for drawing Sonic. This one looks a little wonky, but that's okay. Even as you practice, you'll probably still have some hit and miss going on, you know. Not everything you make is going to be fantastic. I still run into that, even now that I feel more comfortable drawing him. This was just an attempt at drawing using the whole page. I'm not good at drawing big, though, so not Big the Cat, just drawing on a larger scale. So, yeah, that was that. I do better at drawing kind of more this size. Next colored pencil one. The colored pencil looks a lot better. The pose itself, the drawing itself of Sonic, I'd say generally looks pretty good. It's just he's a bit off balance, like he looks like he's about to fall that way. But aside from that, I'd say this one is still pretty good. And the colored pencil, I'm still quite a fan of it. Here I just had some more practices. Different angles, different poses, and then Sonic, Shadow, Silver. I drew Tails again. He's looking better, even though I still haven't used a reference for him. I'll get there eventually. And so then here, next colored pencil one. This one, I'd say the saturation for the colors looks really good. I'm not a fan of how the highlights came out though, so that's the only thing with that. Continuing, more practice drawing Sonic. I think it was at about this point though that I was noticing this weird thing where if I had Sonic looking upwards specifically, his face, it would do this weird thing where his face would like look wide, weirdly wide and flat, smushed. And so I didn't really know what was going on. I think I did look at some images just to reference and study to try to figure out what was going on here. And so I took a step back, and here I just did a very quick sketch of Sonic. I decided to draw Tails. And this is the first time I drew Knuckles, as you'd guess, without a reference, because I'm stupid. But I mean, part of it is I wanted to know how well I knew the character design. So I think it was intentional that I didn't use a reference for this drawing. I just wanted to know how familiar I was with his design. So I would say this, is much better than my first Sonic drawing ever. So at least it's got that going for it, but I don't know if that's really, it's kind of a low bar. But yeah, so, and I mean, the cool thing is that you can see, like, this is better than my first Sonic drawing. So there are improvements happening, and it's not just for Sonic. It's like there are improvements going on that translate to other characters, which I think is pretty cool. This is my next drawing of Sonic, and then this, if you look at the date, April 2nd, 2024. So that was, I did the same pose as my first Sonic drawing, just so that I could see an exact 1 year progress. So that was 2023, and that was 2024. Essentially the same pose. So I had improved a lot. The pose itself, I'd say he looks kind of stiff, but it looks so much better. Moving on, just, more practice, different poses. This one just kind of makes me giggle. And, continuing more different poses. I finally drew Shadow again. So this is a vast improvement, especially his shoes. I think this time I made sure to really look at a reference of his shoes. The last one I did look at a reference of his shoes. I don't know if I was that observant or that careful, but this time I made sure to really look at his shoes and try to, really understand how they were constructed, essentially. So they look a lot better. And then just another practice. Continuing, another pose. I really liked this pose, I just wasn't happy with the shoes, so of course I did it digitally. So here's what it looks like digitally. And then I also decided, since he's airborne, why not also do a supersonic version of this? So this is supersonic. In that pose. And so moving on, just some more practices, posing, more practices. And then, so the date on this is 5/5/24. The next time I drew him was 6/23. So it was more than a month later, like a month and a half later, but 6/23, that's Sonic's birthday. So I just felt compelled to draw him again. And since it's his birthday, I decided I wanted him jumping for joy. It looks kind of stiff. I don't know if it looks like he's jumping exactly, but it looks okay. I've never done a pose like that before, so again, it's good practice. And then below, the same day I drew him, I wanted a side view, so I just drew him looking angry at someone, and so who better for him to be arguing with than Shadow? So I decided to draw Shadow opposite him, and this is the first time that I drew two characters interacting with each other in some way, which is kind of cool. So here are more drawings. Tails. This is the first time I've actually drawn all of Knuckles, and I did use a reference for this one. I didn't follow the reference exactly for the posing, but like for his head, body proportions, and also his shoes, because his shoes are so weird. Yeah, so reference, I figured out how to draw Knuckles, and then to finish the trio, I drew Sonic, just, looking like he's teasing Knuckles or something. It is kind of funny seeing these two side by side. This drawing, though, of Tails, I think this is when I kind of figured out I need to learn how to actually draw Tails, because this pose, he looks dead. He looks so lifeless. His eyes, He just looks like he's staring into the void. I don't know. It doesn't look great, so... But I was working on Knuckles specifically at the time, so I used a reference to draw him, and then I drew him 2 more times without using a reference. And then after I drew these 2, I compared them back to this one and figured out that I was doing this thing where I was like elongating him, which is weird. So I took note of that. I was like, oh, okay, I'm stretching him out, making him tall, weirdly. And so then I corrected that. I drew this without a reference. And then I drew this without a reference. And then I felt pretty satisfied. I was like, okay, I can draw Knuckles now. That's great. And so then from there, because Tails looked so lifeless in that last drawing I did, I decided to use a reference to draw Tails. So I used a reference, drew Tails, figured out kind of how to draw him, and then I did another one. I wasn't using a reference for this one, but I did have this drawing as a reference. So I could, look back at this to remember. I also had him facing the other way just so it wasn't, like an exact copy. And just some practicing drawing hands, because hands can be difficult. Another practice for Tails, another practice for Knuckles, and then to fill out the page a bit better and to finish the trio, I have Sonic here. So this looks like Knuckles is talking about some nonsense and Sonic is completely judging him. So there's that. And then here, this is maybe the best drawing of Tails I have. In this book, maybe, I don't know. But I'm still quite happy with this drawing. So I have Tails here, Knuckles here, he looks annoyed about whatever it is Tails is talking about. And then down here I have Sonic and Shadow having differences of opinion, let's say. Shadow's annoyed, Sonic is laughing. I don't think I had drawn a character laughing before, but I'm not a big fan of how this one came out. Sonic looks like a grandmother. With how he's posed. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that, but, whatever. It's practice. So moving on, did some more practicing drawing Shadow. I'm not a big fan of how these turned out. His face looks a little weird, like it's kind of wide or something, and there's something weird going on with his chest. This one's okay, but I don't know. It could be better. It could also be worse, though, so, Here, again, I decided to finally have another one where 2 characters are interacting, but specifically in contact with one another, which I was kind of intimidated to do. It turned out okay, though. I mean, there's a bit of some wonkiness with, like, the perspective of Sonic's shoes versus the perspective of Shadow's shoes. There's also a weird thing going on with their hand sizes. This one's okay being bigger because, perspective when you're drawing, if the hand is forward, sometimes you'll just draw it bigger. But like the hand on Shadow's back versus Shadow's hands are very obviously different sizes. But what the heck. Crossed arms are hard to draw. But, it's still practice. And then I did this one. I kind of played with the idea that, the edges of the pages are actual boundaries for the character that is being drawn on there. So he's leaning up against the spiral binding, I guess. And then this one is an actually good drawing of a character laughing. While I was drawing this, it was already making me laugh. Like at this stage, I had taken a picture because I thought it was turning out so funny. So... And I'm still quite fond of this one to this day. I think it's fun. Moving on, here's another one I tried to do filling out the page, but again, I'm not very good at drawing on a larger scale. It's still worth the practice, I suppose. And so moving on, another practice of Sonic. And then I just drew a quick and dirty reference of, just Sonic's face. I think I drew this as like a reference and a basis of comparison for drawing Silver. This one I did use a reference, finally. I don't remember if I followed the reference exactly, but if I can find the reference, I'll put it on screen as well. But so I finally used a reference to learn to draw him. I wouldn't say I'm confident in drawing Silver. I don't practice drawing him enough, but this is the first time I actually successfully drew him. And so moving on, this is one of my favorite pages in this sketchbook, because this drawing, I had this idea in my head where I wanted to draw Sonic in a fun handstand pose, one-handed handstand pose. But more specifically, I was very ambitious. I wanted to do this as a colored pencil drawing, which is always very scary to do, because the reason I don't do colored pencil a lot is because it it requires me to ink the lines, and inking gives me so much anxiety. And on top of that, the drawing itself has to be basically perfect. Like, you can't have drawn a dark line and then decide, oh, that's not right, and erase it, because then it will show up with the colored pencil. You'll see the ghosts of those lines. So you have to be confident when you go to darken the lines, which I'm not very good at. So this was intimidating because it was already going to be a very ambitious pose that I had to be pretty perfect about if I wanted to do it colored pencil. But I managed it, and this was the result, and I'm still pretty happy with it. There are some wonky things about it, but meh, it still looks fun. And then down below is the first time I ever did a colored pencil drawing of Shadow, and for some reason I decided I wanted to record it as a time-lapse, and that's actually the first video I have on my channel, is the time-lapse recording of this drawing. It doesn't have a lot of views. I think time-lapses are interesting and fun to watch, but maybe that's not the case for everyone. Maybe I don't know how to, do a thumbnail or to edit the video. I'm not sure. But either way, if anyone is interested in seeing that, it's on this channel. You can see it if you want, if that interests you, but don't feel obligated to if anyone's even made it this far into this video. Anyway, moving on. This is just, I again wanted to play with the idea that the edges of the paper were physical boundaries for the drawn character. So he's leaning up against this edge of the paper. So I just did that to fill the page. I didn't do it colored pencil because, man, that's stressful. And I don't want to even think about trying to do inking and colored pencil on the edge of a paper. So moving on, I finally did one of Sonic laying down. He's sleeping. And then down below, another one where Sonic and Shadow are obviously not in agreement over something. So there's that. And then this, I drew Silver again for the first time in a while. I don't remember if I used a reference for this, at least not for his face. I definitely did for his shoes, because his shoes, again, I struggle with shoes, and his shoes are annoying. And then down here, I think this is the last colored pencil drawing I did. I'd say the colored pencil-wise, overall, is the best I had done up to this point. This is, I want to say it's the second video I have on my channel. I did a time-lapse recording of this one as well and posted it. So again, if anyone watching is interested in that, they can go and check it out. But again, don't feel obligated. Just throwing it out there that it's there if anyone's interested. And then to fill out the page, Tails again, because I hadn't drawn him for a while. So I was like, I need to refresh my memory on how to draw Tails. So moving on, there's a shadow drawing. I'm not a big fan of it. There's something weird up in this area that I can't really put my finger on. But then I drew this one and it was fantastic, and I was a big fan of this one, so I did it digitally. So here's what it looks like digitally. But then I did this and I was not happy with this one. I often take pictures of my progress if I'm happy with how something is progressing, but I'm afraid of how it will, if I ruin it, which this one I did. I'm not a fan of his face. It looks so bad. So I took the progress and I brought it onto my iPad, and then I finished it on my iPad. So this is what the true final of this drawing looks like. And so moving on from there, I have Knuckles stomping off somewhere. I drew Tails below. Very happy. I'm actually still quite happy with this one. I think it's fun. Moving on, another shadow drawing. It's like that from behind drawing of Sonic that I did, but this time it's shadow and looking the other way. I don't know why I keep doing this. Like, drawing characters from the back is not easy, and therefore it's not really very fun. But also his shoes are stupid. I hate drawing his shoes. They're so hard. Why did I pick this angle? But it turned out fine. And I was happy with this one enough that I did it digitally, so here's the digital one. And then, here's a front-on view of Shadow. Not necessarily happy with it, but it could look worse, I guess. And to finish off the page, we have Tails down below. And then that brings us back to the last page of this sketchbook, where I have Silver, Sonic, and Shadow. And because it was the last page of the sketchbook, I wanted it to be special. So that's why I have all three together, posed for battle or something. And so, yeah, that's the journey, my art journey with Sonic. It all started here with just the worst drawing I could have done. And I've come a long way since then, which I just think it's really cool to look back on. And, you know, that's kind of why I started doing the little short stories on my channel. I wanted to put my drawing skills to use in some way, and also give myself reason or an excuse to practice drawing these characters in different poses with different expressions. The short stories just give me that ability to do that more. And I've really enjoyed using the skills that I've accumulated over all this time. And so, you know, like I said at the beginning, if anyone watching feels like, oh, my drawings, they're terrible, there's no way I could ever improve. Well, you know, my drawings weren't always great. I mean, maybe someone could argue that they're still not great, but they're definitely better. So, I don't know. Maybe this is insightful or helpful or motivational to anyone. Just seeing the progress, how things develop, you know, people who are good at art, who can draw in a specific style or specific characters or whatever, they don't get good overnight. It does take time and a lot of practice and study. I mean, study in this case is like looking at other art. But yeah, so, you know, stick with it. If you love doing it, just keep doing it. And if you want to improve, you can improve. You just need to go about it the right way, I guess. Don't be afraid to use references. Don't be afraid to test yourself and try things without reference every once in a while. And yeah, so I guess that's it. But if anyone has gotten this far into the video, if you'd be interested in seeing a tutorial, I guess, for drawing Sonic, if that's something you'd be interested in, let me know. Maybe I could help in that way as well. But other than that, that's all I have for this video.